Thanks for staying up later. Martin Sheen and I adjourned on Thursday night or the early hours of Friday morning. We took a long weekend, got cleaned up, came back, wearing the same clothes just because we liked the way they looked, and now we resume. Covered a lot of ground last time, and let's just forge ahead. You've been in a number of television movies or miniseries with kind of historical backdrops. John Dean and Blind Ambition, Missiles of October, Mitch Snyder's story. I know that's close to your heart, the work that he did
very much
with
so,
the homeless. Let's try and talk about each of them, beginning with Blind Ambition. What did you see in John Dean beyond what we all knew, having followed the Watergate scandal and maybe having read Blind Ambition? What did you see from your research or from your intuition in John Dean that you brought to the role?
Well, I had a very clear feeling that he was telling the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth when he testified. In fact, he was the only one that I was absolutely certain was telling the truth. So I had no difficulty at all playing him. I liked him personally an awful lot. He's also from Ohio, and we had a lot in common. And he was our advisor on the show, so I got to know him a little bit.
So you thought of him as essentially a sympathetic figure, although he wasn't completely, at least you could make an argument. Yes, he told the truth, and therefore he emerged as a hero of Watergate. But by his own testimony, up until that time, he had been blindly ambitious and was in need of a life-transforming experience.
Yeah, very much so, yeah. But imagine if he had not had the courage to speak out, we might still never know what happened, and there might not have been an end to that administration.
There's a scene when he walks in to the prison. How did you get yourself in the frame of mind that allowed that scene to work?
Oh, well, you just hit me with something, because that's a very deeply personal moment. I had to shoot a scene which had no dialogue, where I come into the cell, and I'm dressed in a three-piece suit, as I recall, and it was John's first experience in a locked cell, and his whole life just came tumbling down to this reality. And he broke up and wept in his cell that first time. And I had to do this, and I didn't quite know how to come about it. And I was standing there watching them decorate the set and light the set and set up the shot. And there was a lad who was doing some graffiti with one of these big pens, you know, what do you call that sort of pen? I can't think.
Flare pen?
A flare pen. And I suddenly had the idea, and I asked him if I could use it to make a mark on the wall. And he said, of course, help yourself. And I put it behind my head and put my back up against the wall and looked at the camera and said, now, when you come in on the final shot, are you going to be into about this shot? And he said, yes. The cameraman and the director said, yes. And I said, do you see this spot right above my head? Right there? And he said, yes, that would be at the top of the frame. I said, thank you very much. And I turned around and I wrote the name Ramon Estevez. And I gave the pen back and I said, you call me when you're ready to shoot, not a moment before. And we'll do the scene. The only person in my life who ever called me Ramon was my father. I missed my father's funeral because I was looking after my sister, who had a near-death experience at the time my dad died. And I stayed with her in New York. And the rest of the family went to Ohio for the funeral. So I never mourned him. And I took that opportunity to do it. That's sometimes what is sacramental about acting. You can redeem a lot of feelings and a lot of your spirit by recalling something can happen. We shot it once, and it's there, and it's my...
Did your dad think that your being an actor was a good thing?
No, not at all. No, he was... No, my dad was a factory worker. Sir, I adored him. He had the most beautiful Spanish accent. He was a Gallego from northern Spain who came to the United States with his brother when he was about 16. And he couldn't get into Port of New York because there was a quota on Spaniards, because the Spanish-American War was newly fought. And so he went to Cuba with my uncle Alfonso, and the two of them stayed there for a few years. And then my dad came in by way of Florida on a Cubano passport. And he worked his way up to Dayton, Ohio, and started working in this factory called the NCR, the National Cash Register Company. He spent 47 years with them. He never made more than $140 a year. He was the best man I ever knew. I'm sorry.
It's all right.
But I adored him. He didn't have any knowledge about what I wanted to do. You know, he didn't really know what it was, and he got very angry about it and tried to get me to go to college because I was born with a slight deformity in one of my arms, and he thought of me as a cripple, you know. So he felt that among all these children, I should have an education so I wouldn't have to work for a living. So he saved up this money, put a little aside every week for me to go to college, and then it came time for me to go to college, and I didn't want to go. I wanted to go to New York, be an actor. And it really hurt him. And in the end, I was so determined to do it, and when I proved that I was going to go anyway, then he gave me his blessing and supported me. And we were friends all my life. I adored him.
You had a whole slew of brothers and sisters.
Yeah, there
right?
were. My mother had 12 pregnancies. There were 10 children, 9 boys and 1 girl, and I'm a seventh son. In fact, my brother Alfonso and I have tugged and pushed each other around over that seventh son thing, because that's a very special kind of thing in the Spanish and Irish heritage. He was the seventh one child pregnancy, but I was the seventh one to survive. One boy had died early, you know, and so we still have fun with that. It's great, though.
And your mom died when you were fairly young,
She
right?
was, yeah, she died in '51, just before my 11th birthday, so I didn't really know her all that well. But both of them are very much a part of me, and I don't go anywhere without them.
Jesus and you'll be saved. Pray to Satan and you're a slave. All the gypsies pay women with a hiss of...
Back now with Martin Sheen. If you weren't with us on Thursday night and you're screaming at the set, Costas, why aren't you talking about Apocalypse Now? Why aren't you talking about Badlands? He did it the last time. So go find somebody who has a tape. Let's touch on a few more of these television projects in the time we have remaining. When you played Kennedy, when you played JFK, you decided, I'm not going to try to do what others have tried to do. Look like him, sound like him.
I did try to sound like him because that voice was universally known. There's no way I could get away without trying that. But to look like him, no, I was frankly too short, you know. He was a hero, of course, of mine personally. I'd never met him. I saw him once while he was president, here in New York, in fact. But, oh, gosh, I didn't want to play him because I didn't think I could, and I didn't think it should be done. And I kept turning it down over a period of weeks, and they kept coming back and upping the offer and giving me more and more of the things that I'd asked for. And finally, they just gave me everything I'd asked for, and I was in Mexico at the time doing another show, and I called my wife, Janet, in Los Angeles, and said, Jan, you know, they've given me everything. Morally, I'm bound to do it now. You know, if you make an offer, a counteroffer, and it's what you asked for, you must do it, you know. And I said, I must play John Kennedy. And she said, Martin, it's not a bad idea that you play him because you loved him. And if by your playing him, you prevent someone from playing him who did not love him, it's a good thing. So go to it. And I did. And I never looked over my shoulder again.
If one's honest judgment is that they see heroism in JFK, it's still a trick that needs to be turned. And I don't mean the word trick in a negative way, because there are people who have a cardboard heroic vision of Kennedy as well. And that's been out there in the public perception for so long and so loudly that if you're going to present what you perceive to be his heroism, it's got to be done with a good deal of subtlety to get away from these easy, cliched versions of JFK.
Yeah, he was deeply human and compassionate and funny and concerned and bright. He was all the things that we are, and he was flawed, yes. Thank God he was, man. You know, he wouldn't have been able to accomplish the things that he did if he wasn't human, because he wouldn't have been able to understand his enemies and his opponents, you know. But he understood them very well. He was compassionate towards himself. He loved himself, you know. And he wasn't hard to love for all his faults. No, no, no. On the contrary, I loved him that much more.
What did you see of yourself in Mitch Snyder?
Oh, my. I saw a brother in Mitch, you know. I adored that man. That's another one. He had a profound effect on the moment I met him. I didn't want to do the story because the script was so shallow. It wasn't about him at all, you know. It was about this writer's image of him, which had no relation to reality. He was a tough guy.
Could you see in him, and we're speaking for those of you who don't know of Mitch Snyder, the late advocate for the homeless, who proved to be such a thorn in President Reagan's side.
He was the only guy that Reagan feared.
That eventually Reagan came across with $9 million to provide some funds for the homeless in the Washington, D.C. area. But could you see in Snyder the personal conflict that would eventually lead him to suicide? Could you see that he was a deeply troubled person?
I wouldn't have said he was troubled, but I would say he was deeply entangled in a lot of the same things that I find myself entangled with. There's a great, great anger, which is a healthy thing. I think most of acts of justice are motivated by that energy we call anger. I would never advise anyone to give up their anger. Their hatred, yes, but not their anger, because anger is just an energy. It's nothing to be frightened of. And very often it will motivate you to do justice. And that's what Mitch had. He had an enormous compassion. He felt, and you could feel him feeling for other people. I felt it in him. I was overwhelmed by him. First question he asked me was, how many pairs of shoes do you have? And I had just arrived in Washington. I assumed he meant how many did I bring with me, and I said 2. And he said, you're only entitled to 1. And I said, gosh, you're right, you know. He said, because there are a lot of people out here without shoes, you know, and that's who he was. It's really who he was. And he took me to the grate where he had spent 6 months, this heating grate in Washington, D.C. And he said, I want you to feel what it's like to become a non-human being. You sit here with me under this blanket with just your face showing and watch the world go by. And we did, and we spent the afternoon together, and we made about $13. Without saying a word, people came, but no one shared a word with us. They shared coins, you know, all day. They were passers-by, but no one would talk, no one would look at us, no one would make eye contact. No one wanted any part of us. I was hidden, you know, under the thing, just my face showing. But he had this enormous capacity for love and compassion and creativity. His imagination was unbelievable. You know, the first time I was arrested, he called me and said, congratulations, brother. You know, he knew how difficult it was for me to speak publicly and to risk the consequences for doing something unpopular, you know, for speaking out. So I was here in New York, and I went with Dan Berrigan to the Riverside Research Institute here on 42nd Street and protested the Star Wars research. And I was arrested that day. And that was a profound experience in my life. It was June 20th, 1986. It was my first arrest, first civil disobedience. And Mitch was so totally and keenly aware of that experience and where it would lead. One of the best nights I ever spent in my life was with him in jail, in the D.C. lockup.
Everyone knows that you have sons who are involved in acting, and perhaps the most famous shared project before the one to be released soon, your new film Cadence, in which both Ramon and Charlie appear. The most famous one is Wall Street,
Yeah.
where you play, appropriately enough, Charlie Sheen's father.
Yeah, well, he was responsible for my having the part. He told Oliver that he'd like me to do it, and that was really his doing, and I'm very grateful to him for that. I adore this guy, you know. We had a similar scene in the real life in the Philippines that we played in Wall Street. You know, I had a heart attack. He came over. Of all of them, he was the most frightened. I don't know why. And he brought a baseball and a couple mitts with him. He knew I used to love to play catch with him, and I was in a wheelchair during part of my recovery, and he'd just sit there and be just as close as you and I are now, and just throw the ball back and forth and talk and talk and talk. And then the next day, I'd move further away and further away, and by the end, we were 90, 100 feet away throwing the ball until the ball went over my head one day and ended up in the sea and never saw it again. Charlie was very, very instrumental in my recovery, and I'm very happy to say I was very instrumental in his last summer when, as you know, I'm sure, he went into drug rehab and is doing absolutely extraordinary now. And it's just in my heart forever. All of them are.
In the close to climactic scene in Wall Street, I guess the climactic one would be between Charlie and Michael Douglas toward the end, but you played his blue-collar father.
Yeah.
And he's gone on this yuppie rampage that goes beyond yuppiedom to some sort of perversion that's off the board.
Yeah.
And you're trying to let him know in a face-to-face confrontation what your life has meant and what his life ought to mean.
Yeah.
How difficult was that? I realize that there are professional techniques that people can use and you can detach yourself to some extent, but how difficult is that for a father to say to his own son? And is it possible not to have some of it overlap, what you'd really like to tell him in real life?
Well, you're getting real close to the skin on this one because, you know, Charlie was having some very serious problems at that time. I lived with him for 2 weeks during that period we shot that film here in New York, and he was heaven to work with and hell to live with, frankly. He was in a lot of trouble then. And we had no problem playing that scene. We were doing it every day off camera. You know, I love him enough to tell him the truth always. You know, I love them all that much to tell him the truth. And it was pretty rough. Charlie was influenced by a lot of really powerful people, you know, that had a lot of stuff and not much substance. So he nearly got away, you know. And I promised him I would never, ever, ever let him go. Never, no.
Both he and Ramon are in Cadence, which opens in most of the country sometime around mid-March. It opened in selected cities this past weekend. Tell me a little something about it. I haven't seen it yet.
Well, it's a story of a GI in 1965 who's stationed in West Germany. His father dies. He goes home for the funeral in Montana. He's an orphan now. He wants out of the Army. He goes back to his outfit in West Germany, and he gets involved in a very bad scene. He tattoos himself and gets drunk and destroys some property, hoping he'll be thrown out of the Army. Instead, he's thrown in the stockade for 3 months, and he's the only white guy in there. And now the fun starts. This black community of inmates becomes a family, becomes a very great source of nourishment for him, and changes his life. I play a sergeant in charge of the stockade who's a racist and who is trying to pull him away from this gang of criminals. And my son Ramon plays one of the corporal of the guard. So all three of us are in it. And there are a lot of scenes on camera together where you can't really tell we're related, you know. I'm a whole lot heavier and a whole lot grayer in the picture. And Ramon had to wear a pair of glasses and keep his hat on all the time so that he wouldn't look so much like his brother on camera. And we pulled it off. It's an extraordinary film. It really is. I'm terribly proud of it. A very special film. Very special. I'm terribly proud of it. I just hope it gets a chance to get seen. And that's really why I'm here babbling.
And we'll be right back. Martin Sheen's first feature film as a director is Cadence. It's possible it's already playing in your city. It will certainly be in your area sometime in the next couple of weeks. He's in it along with his sons, Charlie and Ramon, and thank you very much for spending these 2 nights with us. We really enjoyed it.
A real pleasure.
Time to go. See you all later.